This is a little insight in regards to people who have made a bit of popularity for themselves in regards to specifically short selling, short trading stocks, as opposed to long-term investors or your typical sort of investor in the S&P or mainstream picks. For those who are sort of getting interested in that kind of analysis, I wish someone would have explained this to me when there was no one really out there. I've never seen any discussion on this, but many of the people who tend to get very popular on social media, Twitter, X, in regards to their views on short selling, Michael Burry is a good example of this. He goes by Cassandra. He's known they made the movie The Big Short in regards to his shorting of the housing market in 2007, 2008. These are often very similar to if you looked at like people like Peter Schiff, who have consistently made predictions about the market, and what people will say is that for every 1 out of 10 predictions of the stock market collapsing, they've been correct. So they're very consistent in terms of making a lot of negative claims about specific stocks here and there. And there's quite a few people that are known for doing this, especially when you start getting into social media, like financial Twitter aspects of it. You'll start coming across more people that specifically focus on short selling. Many of these people seem to have, like Peter Schiff, mentality that they're really being beneficial towards other people in the market, as though they're kind of like whistleblowers in a sense. And this is not in any remote context the same thing as being a whistleblower. A whistleblower is someone who is actively involved, immersed in the company or the agency or whatever, what have you, and then finds something extremely illegal going on, and then reports it, or goes to the authorities in regards to this. This is a lot different than what some of these short sellers are doing. And I don't mean to paint this as all of them, but I've seen this happen so frequently among people involved in short selling that is the reason why I compare them to people like Peter Schiff, in that they have the same kind of mindset, that they're kind of like this Chicken Little kind of remarks in terms of a specific stock or sector the few times that they're able to get something correct, or in another event where they might actually have people in regulatory agencies listening to them. They sometimes can even be influential on markets or regulations that are affecting these specific industries or specific stocks. And I can think of a few specific examples of companies that were wiped out that really weren't doing anything illegal whatsoever, but were really hammered down by these short seller types. And so they made a lot of money doing this, but yet they weren't really pointing out anything immoral going on. They just specifically, had an axe to grind, or more likely they were just finding a method in which to benefit themselves under the guise of being benevolent. So understanding the psychology behind a sort of Chicken Little analysis, this is a similar situation of short sellers with the sort of savior mindset, buy gold and head for the hills. You may find a bit of parallel with the conspiracy theorist types, who often feel rewarded for attempting to help others out from some sort of impending doom, or having knowledge that is not discussed in mainstream media. In any event, it's always wise to make sure that you're not finding yourself in this sort of black and white scenario. In the same way, in the film The Big Short, you have these young, inexperienced real estate agents selling ninja loans to inexperienced home buyers. I had a recent experience at a car dealership where a younger worker was talking about buying puts in the S&P due to fear of a major market sell-off. Fearing a major sell-off would indeed yield greater return, purchasing exposure to volatility indexes, like a call exposure to the VIX or something along those lines. This is not investment advice, I'm just saying as an example, rather than buying a straight put on the S&P. And for trading long-term, he did admit he actually indeed lost quite a bit going this route so far. I mentioned that always having some long-term hedge in place is smart. His approach did seem as though he thought as though he was outsmarting the market. And this is kind of something that comes up many times again, is having a sense of humility and being humble. You always want to have at least some kind of sense of humility in terms of maybe you don't have all the answers. There's always something else coming up that you might not understand. And that really comes into understanding macroeconomic, the financials of a company, its competition, what kind of moat it has around it. Those are far more important than just having a gut feeling that you think a certain sector is going to tank within the next 6 months, because you've been listening to too many naysayers and Chicken Little types online. The best advice I could give in terms of this is that always frame whatever strong conviction you have against the best criticism of it. And this applies to anything, not just stocks or anything like that, but I mean, political philosophy, anything really, is that once you start getting influence, especially online, from someone who is saying one specific position or another, I mean, you can go on to ChatGPT or any of these other AI bots and say, what's the best argument against this position, too? This goes entirely in play with what I refer to as a macroeconomic kind of mindset, the ability to understand the strongest argument against what you might be compelled to invest your money in or have a belief system towards. There's always very strong arguments against it, and that explains exactly why people go in different directions, entirely different than your own thesis. What is the thesis entirely counter to yours? And that is a really good way of staying objective in this regard, as opposed to, honestly thinking that the entire market is going to collapse and buying ammunition and gold and heading for the hills or something like that. I mean, that's obviously, I mean, for example, like Peter Schiff, he's never ever once discussed in regards to his attitude towards Bitcoin. He's never said once that he shorted Bitcoin or, for example, like MicroStrategy or something like that. In terms of volatility, one could make a lot of money playing derivatives with exposure to some of these cryptocurrency stocks, but knowing how to play them is a lot different than simply saying that, Bitcoin is going to zero or something along those lines.
A little bonus for our carnivore listeners upset about beef prices. Beef prices remain at extreme highs. Screwworm has been reported after not being found in the U.S. for a considerably long time, combined with increased expenses for feed, causing higher demand with lower supply. This also takes time to recover as cattle take time to reach maturity, so I do not anticipate prices to be reduced anytime soon. The good news for listeners of my channel is some insight on how those who still enjoy a good steak, like myself, can offset costs in this regard, in which you may not hear of elsewhere. The following tip isn't something I've really heard discussed many other places, and was something a butcher mentioned to me many, many years ago. So for those who enjoy a good home-cooked steak but don't wish to pay the premiums of a ribeye, in this case, understand that the cut called the Eye of Chuck is considerably less expensive than the ribeye while being very similar to it, as it is directly next to the rib portion of beef. You often won't find this cut on the menu of your favorite fine restaurant, but even my local Walmart has them for considerably less per pound than the ribeye. The marbling and everything one enjoys in a ribeye is pretty much there. While not being identical, you will find a significant reduction in costs here. Just a little bonus, like I said, for our listeners. You don't really hear that data anywhere else, and that's kind of just a bit of insight for anyone, and thank you for enjoying my channel.